Hey, good morning. Hope everybody's well today. It is Wednesday, and like all the Wednesdays that we've talked about so far, I would really encourage anybody that uses tobacco or cannabis to make this a weedless Wednesday. That's always an interesting little project because, if you do something all the time and you are telling yourself, well, this isn't really a problem, I can quit if I want, I just don't want to, check that out. Take a day off, see how that goes. Anyway, what I wanted to talk about today is ADD and ADHD. And I'd invited someone to join us, and he hasn't quite logged in yet, so he may or may not be able to attend. But one of the things that I've noticed with lots and lots of teens and lots of adults that are presenting with substance problems is that for many of them, there seems to be an underlying attention deficit disorder or attention deficit, that's hard to say, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. They're both a little bit different and both very, very much the same. I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint screen here and talk about this um, while I'm talking to you guys. Sorry, you know that this always distracts me a little bit. And that needs to get out of the way. If anybody knows an easier way to do this, please let me know from the beginning. Okay, so ADD and ADHD. So the symptoms are varied, and everybody's a little bit different. Their impulsiveness, disorganization, problems prioritizing, poor time management skills, problems focusing on a specific task, trouble multitasking, and although the individual feels like they're a good multitasker, it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and they're kind of going all over the place. Excessive activity or restlessness, poor ability to plan, and low frustration tolerance. Things get under their skin quite easily. And again, not everybody's exactly the same, and not everybody has all of those characteristics. Uh, what's really interesting about these two disorders, if you want to use that term, uh, is that they both are about not enough dopamine flow into the front part of the brain. So I've got a couple of cartoons here. I wish I could sleep, but my stupid ADD kicks in, and well, basically one sheep, two sheep, cow, turtle, duck, old MacDonald had a farm, hey, Macarena. That's kind of how the brain goes. Or here's another one, a thought by itself. It's more like, okay, there's the thought, and then there's the sub-thought, and then there's a sub-sub-thought, and a sub-thought, and a totally unrelated thought. And the brain's going all over the place. And really what's going on is that those two disorders, there's a lack of dopamine flow into that front part, into that temporal lobe, sorry, not temporal lobe, prefrontal cortex area of the brain. And the person doesn't have enough resources there to manage all the information coming in. Both of these are courtesy of Amen Clinics, the SPECT Scan people. And and you see both of these, where's my magic pointer here? Laser pointer. Okay, both of these, there's a change in activity. This one is a little more dramatic in the front part of the brain. That looks very, very similar to someone's brain who's having a substance problem. And all of those issues, the substance problem and the ADD, ADHD, are impacted by dopamine flow. So I'm going to switch. I'll just leave that on there. What happens, and probably the best explanation I've heard of this, is that people with ADD or ADHD are lacking a traffic cop in the front part of their brain. So when information comes in, it's very, very difficult for them to regulate. It's very difficult for them to manage it. And so this thought comes in, and then, oh, there's another thought, and then there's another thought. And if there's not enough dopamine in there to fuel the traffic cop, he just like, and don't take exception to it, he just kind of sits and eats donuts and doesn't pay attention to what's going on. So ADD, ADHD medications are mild stimulants that increase dopamine flow into that front part of the brain, which gets the traffic cop up and on duty. And it's like, okay, no, we don't need to pay attention to that right now. No, we don't need to pay attention to that right now. We are just paying attention to this thing. And it helps manage the thought processes. So that's basically what that says. I'll just leave that on there in case anybody wants to screenshot it or read it. And of course, this is always available. So when you're feeling like that all the time, you're feeling unsettled. And some people manage that by initiating substance use, because for two reasons. One of them, we feel a lot of frustration because we can't sort things out, and that's annoying. And frustration is stress. And if we're stressed, and if we have learned to use substances to manage that stress, it's really usual that for that person, that's going to happen. They're going to start to use substances. And what's interesting is most substances initially cause a dopamine burst into that prefrontal cortex. And it's like, oh, this feels really good. This is helping me. And to be honest, maybe for 15 minutes it does. Like you feel like you can focus. I've heard that from hundreds of kids who have ADD or ADHD diagnoses and are cannabis users. But the fundamental problem is that the cannabis or the alcohol or whatever drug it is, they all kind of do the same thing, is regularly depleting the availability of dopamine. And so the focus problem or the ADD or the ADHD problem gets worse. And so it's important to get the substance use out of the way and start to look at ways to treat this. So one of the fellows that's done some really interesting work on this is Dr. Gabbard Mattei. He's a addiction medicine doctor from Vancouver. He wrote a really interesting book called Scattered Minds, which I recommend very regularly for people to read. And it explains it. He himself has ADHD. His problem was buying CDs. Like he could not stop himself from buying more and more CDs because they just fascinated him. And when that thought got in his head, he just kind of couldn't leave it alone. But here I'll play this video because he says a few interesting things.
So trauma is not just personal, it's also cultural and it's historical, and it's also transgenerational. And we just can't help passing it on. So if I carry trauma, I can be sure to pass it on to my kids unless I've resolved it, worked it out. And to the extent that I've resolved it, I don't pass it on. And to the extent that I haven't resolved it, we do pass it on. And now if you look at the larger question of why are so many kids being diagnosed, well, it can't be a genetic problem because genes don't change in a population over 5 years or 10 years. So if you're seeing much more ADHD in Norway now, there's a good reason for it. And the reason is that must be, and I don't know much about Norway, but the reason must be that the parenting environment is less and less comfortable for kids. The parents are more and more stressed. The parents are more and more busy. The parents are more and more distracted. Marriages are more conflictual. Maybe there's more depressed people around. Economic stress for both people to work. Communities maybe are less connected. There's less and less of that village, of that attachment village, of that hunter-gatherer type union between people. So because that's what globalization does, is it just keeps destroying and destroying and destroying the basis of human existence in the name of economic progress. And so more and more parents are stressed. Guess what? More kids are going to get diagnosed. And then we say, the kid's got a disease, let's give him a pill. Rather than looking at, well, what is it about the environment? Because the good news is, and I'll talk about that later again if I have a chance, is that the brain can develop new circuits, as I mentioned before. The question is, what conditions is required for that? And if we really understood the implications of the science and the wisdom, then the questions would be asking ourselves, okay, if all these kids are developing problems, what conditions are causing that? And what conditions do we have to create to lead them in a new direction, to help them reconnect?
Okay, so that was Gabbard Mattei, and I don't think that's going to start doing anything else, I hope. So if you read his book, one of the things that he says in there, he was in the womb, and his mom was in Eastern Europe, Hungary, I believe, if I remember correctly. And they were being affected by the Second World War and the Nazis. And his mom was really worried about what was going to happen. So he, in his in vitro environment, there was a lot of stress. When he was born, he was crying all the time. He was upset all the time, and his mom tried everything that she could figure out to do. And she finally phoned the doctor, and she said, my baby Gabor is crying and crying. And the doctor just said, all my Jewish babies are crying. And so the stress that was impacting the family was passed on to the offspring. And you know, we always have to be careful about how we talk about this stuff, because I'm not trying to blame parents about anything, but it's important to understand that that stressful environments have an impact on kids. And so this current situation that we are in right now with this pandemic, and everything's altered and changed, the adults in the house have to work really hard on managing their stress to help teach the kids how to manage theirs. Sorry, wrong button. So what can help here? So diet's important. Sugar is a problem. I think sugar is more addictive than cocaine. I have a sugar problem. I have a terrible ice cream problem, which I'll get into at some other point. But so if we keep the sugar down a little bit, that's useful. Iron and zinc are helpful as supplements. Omega-3 is a helpful supplement, and protein helps feed the brain better. Thinking stuff, and you know, I'm always talking about thinking stuff, and he mentioned it in there too. The brain has incredible capacity to rewire itself, but we have to help it do that. It's not going to just, you know, randomly do that on its own. We have to use our ability to think to start to reprogram how we are doing things. And so CBT, and there's lots of really good online CBT programs. If you go on YouTube and just do a YouTube search for CBT, you can get some really good initial training on, and CBT stands for cognitive behavioral therapy. So we start to use our thinking to manage our behavior. Mindfulness is, you know, I talk about that all the time, that capacity to keep pulling ourselves back into the present. You know, when I was talking about ADD and ADHD before, you know, the mind's going all over the place. It's thinking about what you're doing, and it's thinking about what you did do and what you're going to do, and oh yeah, what about that? It's like that little cartoon with the thought and the sub-thought. we can teach ourselves, retrain our brain to keep pulling that focus back into what's going on right now. Meditation is really valuable. And again, if you go on YouTube, there are lots of meditations that are specifically focused at ADD and ADHD, because the people that are doing those guided meditations understand that this is about retraining our thinking and retraining our brain. And then exercise, and again, it doesn't have to be marathon running. Going for a couple of walks a day, particularly now when things are changed, just going for a couple of relaxing walks a day is, well, my guest is here. Going for a couple of walks a day can be particularly useful. So, hey, Mark,
Hi.
I started this and I'm just about done that. So I just hang in there because I'll ask you a few questions. And I'm just letting you know that we're recording this. So
Yeah, that's fine. Sorry, Rand.
it's okay.
Yeah.
So I just got to stop this share and we'll both pop back on here. It's a pretty fancy headset you have there.
Yeah, nice. How's the sound?
Good. So I just went through a PowerPoint with everybody that explained ADD and ADHD, and I talked about Gabbard Mattei's book, Scattered Minds, and I talked about particularly that one little piece in that book where when he was a baby he was crying, and it was related to the stress that his mom was feeling. And I know you and I have done a little bit of work together, and one of the early things that I said to you was, have you ever looked at sort of ADD stuff? And that kind of seemed like a surprise to you. So could you talk a little bit about what understanding you've acquired of that and what's changed for you?
I could do that for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's, oh, geez. Yeah, I'm settled down now.
Good.
I didn't roll it back far enough. Anyway, how much longer you have this piece running?
As long as we need.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. No, I can talk about that because it links to that, to what he writes in the book as far as what my background and my history as similar thing he writes in the book as, but recognizing everything that is in that book as myself. And once you have the knowledge there is that that's what you're living with and dealing with, then you can accept that and go on from there, and more of an educated basis, understanding what's going on.
So once you started to understand that, how did that help you change how you were managing things?
Well, once I understood it kind of took the pressure off of me, because then you know that there is a reason for this, and you can begin to look back and see how things affected you. And I think I look at that and so how does one deal with that? I've dealt with that recovery program, and the recovery program that's allowed me to share and allowed me to Rand, I look at that thing, patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. I can treat myself with that and my family members with that also. It's it frees you. It makes the abnormal normal.
So just understanding kind of what was going on with you was really helpful for you.
Oh, it changed my life.
Good.
Changed my life.
And you're using that knowledge to both help your family understand you better and
I'm using
also
that, yeah, hmm
good.
using that knowledge to help my family. And my family sees what I've done. My family sees what we can have frank discussions about who I am and how I got here, and they learn from that.
Good.
They learn to accept and understand to an extent the way they are because they can talk knowledgeably about it. We
Awesome.
have a different way of relating.
I think that's true with all of this stuff, like understanding what's going on with us and being able to talk openly about it without feeling shame is really important.
You begin to know yourself.
Yeah,
I call it becoming myself.
good.
I'm becoming myself, and that's a God. That's a freeing thing. I'll tell you. It's just you can take advantage of all those things that you do have that are good about you, and be able to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's well, I've known you for a couple of years, and it's been uh, really rewarding watching you grow and figure stuff out. So
Well, my friend, um, right, right back at you because I hear it's when you got somebody that can lead you down the way, encourage you, and just give me this stuff. Tell me what I have to do. I'll do anything to fix myself.
yeah. Well, I uh, I get a lot of well, I run into kids that I've taught like years ago, and usually the opening comment is, "Jesus, I should have listened to you then." Anyway, but that's probably good enough for today. So thanks
Sure,
for thanks
sure.
for joining
Thanks,
me,
man.
Mark. I appreciate your comments.
Oh, thanks, Rand.
All right, and
Opportunity.
we'll chat later this week.
Okay, great.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye bye.
So that's it for today, folks. Thank you, and I will see you again tomorrow.